A report from Group 17 by Robert C. O'Brien, Chapter 8. Mrs. Adams heard her son Willis come in and mount the stairs to his room. Allison, with her bicycle to push, would be following in a minute. However, she did not, and when 10 minutes had elapsed, her mother called, "Willis, did you tell Allie to come home?" "No. Why not? She was already gone." "Gone where?" "Gone home." "Willis, she's not home." "Yes, she is. Isn't she?" He called, "Allie! Allie!" There was no answer. "Well, her bike was gone." "Gone from where?" "Gone from the road by the wall." "You didn't see her at all?" John, who was studying for a history examination, had come from his room. He was tall, thin, with lank brown hair, one curving lock down his forehead, pale of complexion, serious of mien, with dark blue eyes. "I'll get her," he said, and set out down the road at a brisk walk. In 15 minutes he was back at a dog trot, looking paler than before. "Mother, I can't find her." He was panting. He had run all the way up the hill. "I found the bike, but she's not there. I called. She didn't answer at all." "Where?" "Well," he dreaded to say it, "at the river." "At the river?" "That's where the bike is." "Where at the river?" She went to the closet and put on a light coat, a raincoat. From a desk drawer, she took a flashlight. It had grown quite dark outside. "Just at the end of the road, right on the bank. The bike is lying in the mud." "Come on." She started for the door and then stopped. "Willis, you come too." The thought of leaving Willis in the house alone had suddenly become intolerable. She did not stop to think why. They called as they walked down the road, slowing their footsteps to listen for an answer that did not come. In the dark, by the beam of the flashlight, they found the bicycle next to the swirl of the water. They called again. The bicycle had fallen, with one handlebar extended over the bank, like a thin arm, its hand grip pointing toward the water in a gesture both horrifying and inescapable. The ground was wet underfoot and sucked at the soles of their shoes. They looked for footprints, but the flashlight created only contorted black shadows in the bog. "Willis, did you and Allie come to the river today?" "No, we never come to the river." He was starting to cry. He tried not to. Why had Allie, when she came out the gate and got on her bike, then ridden the wrong way? She must have stayed inside too long and then been mixed up by the dark. Mrs. Adams stood facing the river, staring into the water, unable to see anything. She looked to her right. There rose a stone wall that surrounded the Russian villa, visible in the night only as a darker shadow. Allie could not have wandered that way. There remained the meadow to her left. She could have gone that way, but why? They had on occasion walked the river bank to fish. Sometimes they found Indian arrowheads there. Allie might have found one and looked for more. She said to the children, "She might be in the field." But as soon as they started to look, they knew it was futile. The flashlight beam dwindled to nothing 30 feet away. The meadow went on for a mile or more. In any case, Allie would not have kept going after dark. It was impossible to believe she would have done that. She turned the flashlight out and led them back. "It's no use," she said. She wanted to give up, to slump down in the mud, to weep. But for the sake of the children, she could not. She was sure that Allison had drowned, had somehow, by mistake, driven her bicycle to the riverbank, turned too sharply at the last minute, and fallen. She could not dispel this picture from her mind, though she knew it was premature. Allison might be at home, waiting, wondering where they were, with a simple explanation of what had happened. Someone had stolen her bicycle. John said, "Mother, we'd better go home and call the police." "I know." They started up the hill. Willis was now crying openly. "Mother, is she drowned? Where is she?" She put an arm around his shoulder, feeling its thinness shaking under her hand. "Poor Willis, I don't know. Maybe the police will find her. We have to wait and see." The police came 3 times, twice that night and again the next morning. It took them half an hour to arrive the first time, and while she waited, she tried to get the children to eat some supper, and to eat some herself. She was able to drink some coffee. When they arrived, big polite men in gray uniforms, with pistols strapped to their sides, they asked questions. Allie's age, height, weight, color of hair, clothing, any recent photographs? Their names, printed on small plates on their uniform jackets, were Officer Simon and Officer Davis. Then they went to their police car, taking Mrs. Adams with them, down to the riverbank where the bicycle still lay forlornly in the mud. She told them, as well as she knew, the events of the evening, pointing out the bottom of the hill where Willis had last seen Allison. The police car had a searchlight, and they trained it out over the water, its beams shining all the way to the other bank, but revealing only trees, earth, and water flowing. It traced the near bank, stopping where something glinted. "Beer can," muttered Officer Simon. It reached the wall where it met the river and followed its stony side up the hill until it disappeared into the trees. The light circled on, stabbing through the scrub growth on the bluff. It found something white, and her heart leaped. "Dogwood," Officer Simon said. It swept the meadow for half its length, revealing nothing. At last they took her home. Officer Simon put the bicycle in the back of the police car. "No reason to leave it lying here," he said. When they reached her house, he took it out and left it carefully propped against the porch. There was finality in the act. The second time they came was near midnight. Officer Simon, who had kind gray eyes and a face tanned bronze, whose voice had a soft Virginia accent, said, We went back down there, Mrs. Adam, and looked some more. We called headquarters and put out a description, what we call an APB. We contacted the state police, and they'll put a launch in the water as soon as it's light enough to see." Not until morning. "Ma'am, there's a rapids just a little way down, and that's where they got to look. They can't get down there in the dark. They'll use a helicopter, too, but it's no good at night. I'm sorry, Mrs. Adam, but if she's in the river, it isn't going to make any difference." The third time they came was mid-morning. The state police launch had found nothing, they reported. The helicopter had seen nothing. Such reports, they cautioned, must be regarded only as inconclusive, not optimistic. Most often it's a week or more before they show up, Officer Davis explained. We get 2 or 3 drownings a year along there. It's the rapids. At the riverfront once more, the officer showed Mrs. Adam and John what they had found by daylight, merely the confirming tire marks of the bicycle leading across the mud to the water's edge. Of footprints, there were a confusion, including their own from the night before. Willis stayed in the car, huddled in the corner of the back seat. He did not want to see. "It's pretty clear what happened, ma'am." She stayed around too late, got mixed up in the dark, rode in the wrong direction. Maybe something scared her. There are possums, raccoons, pretty big animals. Allie wasn't scared of animals, John spoke flatly. She liked animals better than anybody. Officer Davis said, "Things look different at night, son." Officer Simon changed the subject. "We checked the whole field and the woods beyond it. There's a house up there on the bluff, a log house. Do you know who lives there?" "I've seen the house," Mrs. Adams said. "It belongs to Mr. Wilcox. I believe he and his sons built it, but nobody lives there." The 2 officers looked at one another. "Somebody's living there now," said Officer Simon. "There's smoke coming out the chimney." "We'll check it out," Officer Davis said. "It's just possible she went in there and fell asleep. If she got cold, she might have lit a fire. Kids do funny things." "No," said Mrs. Adam, "it isn't possible. Allison wouldn't have done that. She started to tell the 2 strangers what Allison was like. She realized there was no use trying, yet the recollection came clearly, too clearly, and for the first time the tears streamed over her face. John, looking frightened, came to her side and caught her hand, but said nothing. She was glad Willis was not there to see. He was still huddled in the car, and as they drove back, Officer Simon spoke to him. "Show me where your sister was when you left her." "It was here." They stopped the car and got out again. They were near the corner of the wall near the main gate. "You went home and she stayed here?" "Yes, she told me to, and she would come in a minute." Officer Simon, followed by Officer Davis, walked to the gate, pushed it, then pulled it. It remained immovable. "Locked." "That's the Russian place," John said. "It's always locked. They don't use this gate." Officer Simon, his gray eyes speculative, said, "Still, I'd like to have a look in there." Willis remained silent. He did not betray Allison, even though she was drowned. They returned to the car and to the house. The officers left. Fergus, having cleaned his 3 bass and put them in the refrigerator, was cooking his lunch, a hamburger, when the police drove up. Through the cabin window, he saw 2 men in uniform emerge from the car and realized they must be the same 2 he had seen earlier near the riverbank. He recalled again the sad face of the woman who had been with them. They knocked and he opened the door, stepping out on the small flagstone terrace on the uphill side of the cabin. They explained their visit. A girl had drowned in the river the preceding night. They had spoken to Mr. Wilcox and learned that he, Dr. Fergus O'Neill, was a guest in the cabin here for the fishing. The cabin was the nearest habitation to the place where the girl had drowned. Had he heard or seen anything unusual? "Nothing at all," said Fergus. "It's been perfectly quiet. Won't you come inside? Where and when did she drown?" When they came in, glanced quickly around the big orderly rustic room, noted the hamburger cooking, looked at the porch and admired the view, and left. Mr. Wilcox, a famous and important man, had indicated strongly that Dr. O'Neill's credentials were impeccable, and all appearances confirmed this. When Allie woke up again, she could move, but only very slowly and very quietly, and she could not speak above a whisper. She had lost her voice, but she did not care. She felt nice. She knew all those things immediately on waking because she remembered them from her sleep. It was like a dream, but it was not a dream. The animal keeper, who was a doctor, he had told her he was a doctor, but not his name, said that when she woke up, she would remember it all, and so she did. He had given her a shot. He told her the needle would not hurt, and it did not. His glasses were very shiny and so thick she could not see his eyes. He told her that everything he said was true, and she would believe it, whether she was asleep or awake, and she did. That was how she knew she could not speak, but only whisper, and she felt nice. She looked up and was not at all frightened when she saw the brown, bearded face staring at her. Its ears stood straight up, and one of them had a hole in it. It was Victor, the new chimpanzee, in the cage next to her. In the room with them there was a bench, a table, a big gray laundry tub with faucets, 3 doors leading out, and not much else. And that is the end of chapter 8.